Hello, and welcome to the 360 Method, a weekly podcast where we talk about everything Autism 360. Each week, we'll be catching you up with what's going on in the program, chatting with team members, and talking all things mindset, as well as exploring relevant ideas that autism parents think about. Today, hooray, we are chatting with Dr. Jennifer Welker. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
So good. Jen is a longtime coach here at the program, a special education teacher, and a BCBA. And today we get to chat with Jen about prompting, what it is, how it can help build skills, and how we can harness its power in our everyday lives.
Yes.
So I am your host. I'm Ella Bailey. I'm an Autism 360 veteran coach and explorer of all things parenting support. Before becoming an Autism 360 parenting team member, I worked in psychological research and in behavioural psychology. So welcome to you, our lovely listeners. Thank you so much for joining myself and Jen today. We care about you. We care about your thoughts, and whether you're a program member or not, we would love to hear from you. So please drop us a line at hello@autism360.com. We would love your feedback. You can leave Jen some questions and we can grab her back on to answer them at a later stage. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation on whose land I live and work, and from where this podcast is being broadcast today. And I would also like to make the disclaimer that this podcast, no matter how fancy Jen is, it does not substitute for medical advice. If you are concerned about yourself or about a loved one, please do access a medical professional. So Jen, hooray, today. Yes, we're going to be chatting about prompting and everyday life with Jen. So I want to start with, why are you so passionate about prompting? Jen, tell us why this makes you so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about prompting, I mean, it sounds like a fancy term, right? Like, oh, I'm going to prompt you to do something. But truly, we are surrounded by prompts every day. It's really just a form of support, and prompts help teach us things. So I'm passionate because it's super relevant and it kind of expands over a multitude of situations. And so if you can kind of harness the power of prompting, then you can really do a lot to teach your kiddos, individuals, learners, family members, whoever it is that, may benefit from that. And whether you realize it or not, you're probably using it already. So it's a way to support each other. And so why wouldn't we want to do that,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something is totally on the money. What you said just then is that actually we're all surrounded by prompts all the time. We were just mentioning before that, we have a written prompt in the form of an outline about what we're going to chat about today. And that's also a prompt, isn't it?
Exactly. So yeah, here we think like, oh, I don't know how to use prompts, or I don't know the different kinds of prompts. And so I'm hoping that today we can just kind of identify and break down the different prompts that are out there, and just realize that, because we're all individuals, we all respond to different prompts differently, some better than others. And so that's why knowing many kinds and having examples of each is really helpful, because you might try one thing and think, this isn't working. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something else that would work just beautifully. So I'm hoping today we can go through all that. It helps reduce frustration when you have the right kind of prompts, and it takes something that's uncertain, or maybe, kind of not concrete, and it can make it certain and concrete, which is such a big deal for some of our individuals who have trouble with abstract thinking.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I think from a parent coaching perspective, I'm often thinking about, okay, well, how are the strategies that I'm suggesting, the support strategies that I'm suggesting for supporting an individual, how are they affecting the mental health, the mindset, the morale of the parents and carers of these individuals. And I think that prompting does a lot for giving parents and carers a framework from which to understand how they can support somebody in a specific goal. And I think that when they have that, they can feel a little bit less dependent on therapeutic individuals, therapeutic professionals, because they know what the next step is going to be. They know what success looks like. They know what is going to help their loved one to feel more independent, which is the goal and what parents are often aiming for.
Yes, and that's actually just what I was thinking is the whole reason that prompting is an amazing tool is because it does help build independence. And you would think it's kind of opposite, like, oh, if I prompt, I'm helping. So maybe I'm not contributing towards their independence, but that is absolutely not the case. And, you know, as we dive in, I hope that we can kind of see how just knowing a little bit of strategy with prompting, we can actually move more towards independence, which is always what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we get started with some of the fundamentals of prompting that you feel like would benefit parents and carers to understand? I'm going to give you kind of open slather to really teach us a little bit about, you know, the basics of the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely want to, you know, address the different prompts that are out there, give some examples. And there is a hierarchy of prompts. And so when I say that, I really just mean prompts that are more intrusive to helping an individual and then to less intrusive. And so because we want to build independence, using the most intrusive prompt all the time, you might get a little stuck. And so knowing kind of, oh, what's the next level of prompting I could go to and what does that look like? That's a fundamental that's really going to help us. And so on that topic too, like it's called fading the prompt. So you might start here because your individual really needs that level of support, but your goal is never to stay there, but to move towards something less intrusive or less frequent or, you know, whatever it is, so that your learner can take on more of that on themselves. And so, are we ready to talk examples of prompts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be helpful just to define what you mean by intrusive.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, more broadly.
Yes. So intrusive is just kind of how much it can interfere with or just be, I guess, more burdensome on the individual. So for example, we have physical prompting. Okay, so let's say that, because I work with 3 and 4-year-olds frequently on a daily basis. And so let's say that I'm like, okay, come here. And that's actually just a verbal prompt, like, come here. And then they're like, oh, but this ball over here is so much more fun. So I'm going to go this way. And they need some guidance because they're not understanding come here. So if I have to physically go over and like guide them, oh, we're coming this way, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not something that you want to be doing every day all the time because it's not feasible. You're not always in close proximity. Sometimes there are safety issues where it's like, I just need you to, you know, move now so you don't get hit by something that's passing by. And so a physical prompt is important and there's a place for it, but it is more intrusive upon the child. I have to touch them. I have to, you know, walk over here and I have to kind of exert myself. And so that's, again, time and place for it, but it's not something I would want to do all the time. It can really get in the way of their independence.
Okay, absolutely. That makes sense. I'd love to talk examples. What are some common ones that you see or ones that you work with program families on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to name some of the different types real quick in order, and then I'll go back and dissect them a bit. So
Awesome.
If we're talking from the most intrusive, which would also equal less independent, okay, we have that full physical prompt. So I have to actually physically help you know what to do to get where you need to go. Then there's a partial physical, which we can talk about the difference soon. There's modeling, there's gestural, and then we have verbal, which is probably our most common type of prompt that we use in everyday life. And finally, visual comes in at the least intrusive and builds the most independence. And that's why if you have had anything to do with Autism 360 in the past, you have heard visuals, 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 and why they're great. And I definitely agree. And here's why. So talking about full physical, again, it's that hand over hand prompt. It's that physically guiding a learner's body to complete an action. So, story time. I have kiddos and every day we're just working on imitation and they're so cute. They're sitting there and they're like ready to work. And I'm like, okay, can you do this? Or can you clap? And they're like, no, And so initially I may have to kind of help them bring their hands up and go, oh, clap, yes. And I'm doing it for them. And then they're like, oh, okay. So sometimes that full physical prompt is necessary to build that motor planning, that brain body connection, and for them to just understand my expectation. So that's something at home too. I think we use so many verbal prompts where we're like, go do this, go do this. And our child or individual might just be kind of sitting there and we think, well, they're being defiant. They don't want to listen. Yeah. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's literally like, I'm not processing what you mean by that directive. So sometimes we do have to start with like, let me help you get to that point where you're doing that. So then you can go to a partial physical, which is a little bit less intrusive, but you're kind of getting the learner started, but not finishing it for them. So again, I had a kiddo who is now in kindergarten. And so we really had to break steps down for him, even to clap, because his body was just kind of like, I'm not very responsive to things like that. So at first we would help him clap, but then he came to kind of rely on that prompt. Like he'd wait for us because he's like, well, I kind of like that touch. I kind of like when you put your hands on my hands. So we began to just lift his elbows up and I would support here. And then he would look at me and I'd wait and he'd go. And so then I'm like, wow, you're clapping, awesome. And then that was reinforcing. And so I was able to move from a full physical where I'm hand over hand to I'm just kind of getting your elbows up and then you can do it. And then finally, after some practice, he was doing it all on his own, which is super rewarding to see as a therapist, a teacher, and then a parent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's something especially important to the way that the coaching at Autism 360 works, which is, and again, I brought it up before, which is that parents need to feel seen and validated and heard in this process as well. And that's okay. It's okay to say, it feels good when I'm able to teach my kids something and they respond. That's not something that we demonize here at the program. It's okay to have emotional responses to your kiddo picking something up or needing you less. I think I feel really passionate about that, in case you can't tell.
Yes. Yeah. And that's our goal, right? Like we celebrate the littlest things. Yeah. And in my school, it's a public school setting. We have, the mainstream classrooms along with special education classrooms that focus on, functional life skills. And I think that sometimes the mainstream teachers like walk by and hear me going, whoa, you peed on the potty. And they're just like, wow,
what do they do in there? Yes. I listened to another really good podcast called Two Peas in a Podcast. And they are two mums of kids with additional needs. And they have reclaimed the idea of milestones from something that can be really tricky and sometimes triggering for parents of kids, you know, with complex needs, to milestones, right? Like our milestones might not look like everybody else's milestone, but they're a milestone for us. If your kiddo like pees on the toilet and they're 9 and it is the biggest deal ever, that is the most awesome milestone. And I'm totally disseminating the use of the word milestone. So you can take that and run with it as far
I like
as
that.
Yeah,
I like that. I probably am going to use it actually. So
definitely.
thank you for that. Yes, and that is, it's really a mindset shift, isn't it? Like
Totally.
just to be able to look at these things as a process and to know that it's okay. And parents, families, they're all in a different place in this journey. But as long as you're working towards that independence and just things that help your family life run smoother,
Totally.
I mean, that's our goal, you know, and every family's different, so it's not going to look the same for everyone. But the point is, our mindset is okay with, you know, slow progress as long as it's progress, or, you know, you may be here and I may be here, but that's okay because every day we are learning and we are getting there. And so that's prompting aligns with that so well, because it is like a more tangible and like specific way of seeing how you move from here to there. And that's what I love about it. So I talked about full physical and partial physical, which are both really great. Thinking of other times you might use those. For a littler one, maybe they're learning how to do a puzzle, or like putting the shapes inside the sorter, you know, fitting the circle into the circle hole and the square into the square hole. And again, their little fine motor skills are trying to get it in there, but they're struggling. So before they reach that point of frustration, a prompt is simply just to come in with that physical or partial physical and helping them, you know, fit the shape in how it goes, and then good job, you got it in. And so those are things I do every day, so they're easy examples for me to think of. But you know, you might have someone who has more of a physical disability or handicap, and they are just needing to learn how to you know, more use of their arms or their legs or something. And so we see it all the time in physical therapy, like, I'm going to support you, maybe hold under your, you know, your arms while you take some steps and get stronger. And no one would ever look at that and be like, well, you're helping too much. I mean, if I let go, the person might fall. So think of it as like totally a support, where you are showing and offering a level of you know, strengthening until your individual gets to that point where they're strong enough to do it on their own. And so that's, you know, that's why it's exciting. So the next one is modeling. So that this is pretty cut and dry. You know, I'm going to show you how to do it and then give you a chance to try doing it back. So one form of modeling that I love, besides just like, okay, you know, first pick up your plate and then throw it in the trash after breakfast. So I'm going to do it and show you, and then your turn. Okay, good job. You know, that's easy. But also video modeling. I cannot tell you how much video modeling has helped with the simplest routines around the house. So I've used it for potty training. I've used it for washing hands, a lot of functional skills, even like taking bites at the table, or just knowing what it looks like to sit as a family. Our kiddos and our adults and me and you and all of us, we like watching videos. We do. You're watching a video right now, probably.
That's why YouTube is a thing, right?
Exactly. And there's a reason that YouTubers, like, people are like, I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up, because it's a form of entertainment. And so we kind of can tap into that and just show individuals like how to do everyday things that they otherwise struggle with, because it's repetitive, it's consistent, it's reliable. And that is something that many of our learners look for. Like, I need to trust this to not change so that I know what to do. And so a video model is great, but so is a model right then and there. I was actually babysitting one time, more than one time this happened. And the little 5-year-old like gets on YouTube, and I'm just like, what are you watching? You know, gotta make sure it's okay. And she's watching another, like, 2 girls play Barbies. Yeah, in this dollhouse. And they're like, hello, how are you today? Oh, I'm fine, thank you. Do you want to order pizza? Yes, let's order pizza. And then they go through the whole like script of a play situation. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is a video model for appropriate play. And any typically neurotypical child would like to watch this. So, you know, it's very normal for us to be drawn to these things. So modeling is a very, very strong prompt that you can use, but you can also fade, because you are using it to teach.
Yeah.
So once your learner starts doing those things more independently, then you kind of need to move on to, okay, I don't need to show you every time, but maybe they still need some support, some reminders. So that's where some of these other prompts on the hierarchy come in. The next one is gestural. So this could be your pointing to something, using eye contact, which this can be hard if your individual doesn't really like that eye contact. So maybe that wouldn't be for everyone, but I might like eye gaze to show you where to go or where to look. Tapping an area to bring attention to it. So this is, pretty simple. But the reason that I like it is because if I know that a child at school, for example, let's say we say, okay, it's time to line up, or it's time to get your backpack. And you know that your child knows how to do this, right? But they're just not quite there. Instead of modeling the whole process, okay, we're going to get our backpack, or physically being like, go get your backpack, a gestural prompt could simply just be like holding up the backpack and tapping it or pointing, and then put it right back where it was. And then, the child's like, oh, my backpack. Yes. I forgot for a second what that word meant, or I was not listening. So gestural, I might point like it's time to go to the bathroom. And you just kind of wait. And they're like looking at you like, oh yeah, okay, all right, got it. So
it also gives time for processing, right? Like words, they disappear straight away. As soon as they're out of our mouth, they're gone. A gesture can linger a little longer. It engages visual processing. It engages kinetic processing to give that person longer to process your instruction, which we love.
Yes. And it really also can help reduce or prevent frustration in a situation where maybe like me constantly saying something to you is just annoying. I find it's very common for us to overwhelm those around us with our words. So if I am constantly like, go pick up your toys. Hey, go pick up your toys. I said, go pick up your toys. Go pick up your toys. So it's that definition of insanity again, like it's just doing the same thing over and over and expecting this, a different result. Like,
right.
If your person's not responding to that, there's a reason. And so what I like about a gestural prompt, especially, is I can take out my verbals and I can just be like, and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And so it can prevent that frustration of like, now I'm not doing the task just because I'm so like auditorily overwhelmed by your voice and your repetition.
Totally. And for those
So.
listening, Jen is making hand signals to indicate and gesture to somebody to give them an instruction without needing to use words.
Yes, a lot of pointing and referencing. I need to illustrate my talking hands a little bit better.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on up the hierarchy to more independent and less intrusive, we get to the verbal prompts. And so this is, again, probably the most common thing that we use. There's direct verbal, so I'm telling you exactly what to do. And then there's indirect. So that might be more of a leading kind of a verbal. So like I'm asking you a question, I'm cueing or giving you a hint, but it's not as direct with the answer. So again, these are super necessary, especially if you're working on like expressive language with someone and they just don't have the words or they don't know the right words to say, and you're telling them essentially, oh, you want to play with those friends over there? You can say, can I play with you? And then you gave them that verbal prompt. But then again, once you prompt that a few times, you do want to look at fading it back to more of an indirect. So, oh, what could you say when you want to play with friends? And give them a chance to process that information and recall it for more independence. And so verbals are important. They're around every day and they are necessary. However, I do think we overuse them a lot of the time. I really do.
Super interesting. I think something you mentioned really speaks to an interest area of mine, which is when kiddos have an anxiety around demands, right? So a lot of demand, a lot of parents and carers don't recognize that they're placing demands by using verbal prompts. So when we're using an indirect verbal prompt, that might be something like, oh, the bath is full. So you are giving a verbal prompt, you are explaining something in their environment that's indicative of a required behavior, but you're not placing a direct demand. And so when we're using demand reduction language or kind of end state language, that's an indirect verbal prompt that helps our kiddo to feel safe with managing that demand without spiking their demand anxiety, which we are all about.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because sometimes, and I have to admit, like I get like this too, maybe with my husband, my partner, like just because he said I should, I automatically am like, maybe I don't want to, because
definitely not doing that now.
Yeah,
there's
just a part of me that doesn't like to be told what to do. And
I think there's a big part of all of us.
Yes, we're all a little demand avoidant.
Yep.
For sure. But I used an indirect prompt like that just today with a kiddo who I don't think she was feeling well. I really think she wanted to go home. But that wasn't able to happen, unfortunately, at the time. And so we were just trying to kind of move on and make the day as pleasant as possible. And so she sat on the floor and she just kind of put all her weight into it, like, I'm staying here. And she was in a doorway and not in the best spot. So, we started by asking her verbally, straightforward, like, well, what would you like to do? And she was just like, no, no, no. And so I went indirect. And I went and got some kinetic sand and some pom-poms that happened to be a little like build an ice cream kit. And I just was like, oh, cool. I can build an ice cream. And then I sat it down in front of her, but not right to her. And I started opening the box and I'm like, whoa, I want to do this. And I like walk towards her seat and she like pops up and kind of follows me. And I'm like, oh, did you want to do it too? Okay. And so there
Love
was
it.
that.
Yeah.
That very indirect leading of like, I'm presenting something, I'm cueing you that it's there, but I'm not directly telling you. And then she picked up on, oh, this is available. Okay, yeah, I'm totally ready to get up and get going. So, and that, that was also a little bit of modeling on my part, a little bit of some other things, but it prevented me from having to physically guide her. And that's what we want to do, is try to avoid, touching when they're uncomfortable with that, or forcing. And again, there's a place for it. But in situations like that, I'd rather not have to lift you up off the floor and move you. You're going to get upset. You don't feel good.
We want to let that kiddo be as independent as possible and be as, least invasive as possible.
Yes. So that helps with that. And then the final prompt, which is the most independent and the least intrusive, least invasive, is visual prompting. Everyone's favorite here at Autism 360.
Hooray for visuals.
Woo! Yeah, so pictures, schedules, written words, checklists, color coding, highlighting, all of the things that, again, I think we use in daily life all the time, and we don't even think about it. And yet sometimes we expect our kiddos or individuals to go without a visual. And we think that if we just tell them that they're going to get it, but it's not enough. So I think the prompts that I encourage the most to parents, carers, and at school are visual prompts. And they just, once again, I could take my verbals out, which can be annoying and hard to process. It allows consistency. It provides concrete information and input. There was a child just today that was very upset and very dysregulated. And because of this dysregulation, he was being a bit unsafe. So we had him in a safe space, but he was just so, terribly dysregulated that I knew that I knew talking to him was only going to make it worse and even feed into it maybe a bit. So I quickly, at the end of the day, I created a visual, but prior to that, I was like, what can I get? And I grab a whiteboard and I just kind of write a couple words like calm hands, quiet mouth, or quiet body, or something. And I just held it up and was just, it was visual, it was gestural, and I just kind of waited, like, or you might have a breathing, symbol or something like that. And, it took a few minutes, but he did finally understand, like, okay, I'm ready. And then we were able to talk and make some choices and move past that hard situation. But, and then he needed a schedule to get through the rest of the day, which is no shocker. Like, he was like, there's so much I have left to do. And I'm like, well, let's make a checklist. So I write it out real quick and I'm like, science, math station, library, home. And then, he was kind of like, oh, I just want home. And I'm like, that's okay. Only 3 things, then home. And I really and I used a timer along with that for each section. And then he crossed it off. So those are all different kinds of visual prompts that totally supported him. And instead of having to scream and be upset and dysregulated all afternoon, it was short-lived. And then we made it through the rest of the day with extra prompting. So I would not be able to do what I do and see the success that I see without prompts. So it's very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we should move on to our parent question, because this is something that I see a lot for parents in the program. A lot of parents come to us at different stages, but we see a lot of parents getting roadblocks around toileting, around building their kids' independence with, bowel movements and those kinds of things. So we have an awesome question from Chopra in Adelaide, who says, I have a 4.5-year-old son who we are working with on toilet training. He will go with us, but only ever after we have asked him to go. Once we have said, do you want to go to the toilet? He will go with us. How do we get him to ask to go to the toilet without us asking all the time? When will he be independent?
Yeah. And that is, I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Many a time. And it's great that they're even to that point where they'll
totally go. Oh my gosh, such a win. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's good in and of itself, but we can still always build independence. And so, and I don't know if I use the term prompt fading too much yet, but prompt fading is kind of what needs to happen here. So if you're asking a question, think about what kind of prompt that is. It's a verbal prompt, probably indirect, like, do you need to go to the bathroom? Might even be considered direct in that case. And verbal prompts, they are harder to fade, but the thing that is more independent building prompt-wise is a visual. And even a gestural, which is a different place on the hierarchy, but I think it would still be okay here. So for example, you might print a picture of the bathroom or, just a toilet off, and you might just hold it up. And that's a cue to be like, do you need to go? Or you might just point to the bathroom and gesture like, do you have to go? Like, I'm asking you this question. Setting a timer throughout the days that child can start checking on their own, like timer goes off and then there's a visual right there. And they're like, timer, bathroom. Oh yeah, I should probably go. And then essentially you might have a clock if they can do that, a vibrate reminder. So just think about how to replace your questions and your verbals with something more natural in the environment. And just, you could build it into the schedule too, or leave those visual hints where you have, the bathroom picture like all over the house, and the child is bound to see it at some point. And so then if they look at it, it's more likely to trigger in their brain, oh, do I need to go? Yeah, maybe I should go. And so that's how I would kind of address that situation, trying to use some other things besides just questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. Chopra, I hope that is helpful. Please get in touch if that is something that you give a try, because we would love to hear how that works out for you. Jen, it is so lovely to hear your thoughts on this one. Before we finish up, are there any action points or things that you would like our parents to specifically take home from what we've chatted about today?
Yeah, I think just to break it down, think of a scenario where your child or individual learner could become more independent, something that would make life better for all of the family. And don't feel guilty about that either. Don't feel guilty about, this is going to make my life easier. That's okay. That makes it a functional and valid point to work on. Absolutely. So think about that. And then using the types of prompts, just kind of make a list of how you could support your learner with the different types of prompts. Look at that and think, what's most feasible for us, or where could I start and build the most success? And then don't get stuck on that one prompt though. How can you fade it to get them to be more independent? So just think of a scenario, list out the prompts and what they could look like in that scenario, and then finally make a plan to move from most to least intrusive and watch that independence grow.
Oh, how good is that? We love it. Thank you so much for joining us today. For our program parents, if you would like to see more of Jen, we have some really interesting coach panel recordings, which Jen really generously shares her wisdom and knowledge with our parents. So hop on the portal, chat with her about that, and we will be back next week with another topic relevant to what autism parents think about. So we will, hear from somebody else then. And until then, think 360.